Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of 10 Minute Marvel. Well, we have had a whole bunch of slow news weeks, but that's about to change this week. So buckle in for that. Plus then we're talking about She-Hulk episode 7, which definitely has some interesting things going on. But before I get to all of that, I just want to thank you for listening. I hope that you're enjoying this podcast. If you are, please consider subscribing, sharing with your friends, or leaving a rating and review. You can find the podcast over on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. So like I said, let's jump into the news here because there's a whole bunch of news starting out with Black Panther Wakanda Forever. A new trailer dropped and tickets are now on sale. Definitely have more of an idea of what the plot is. We have seen somebody, a female figure, in the Black Panther suit. Namor has his winged feet, and the whole thing, I think, looks very interesting. This is a little bit hard to tell at this point in time. I do feel like, and I hope is the case, they have hidden a fair amount of the plot. But one interesting thing to note, basically, is that there's this serpent sun deity that has been tied to Namor. From the sounds of it, maybe even like Namor is the avatar of that deity, much like the Black Panther is for Bast or Moon Knight is for Khonshu, and that Namor, well, not necessarily a good guy, might be what is holding everything in balance, so you can't just take out Namor to try and solve your problems, which might be what the plan was were it not for that. Also, the Avengers Secret Wars now has its writer. So Avengers Secret Wars is being written by Michael Waldron. Michael Waldron might be a name that seems familiar. He wrote and produced Loki, as well as then Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. So he has done some of the weirder stuff that we've had in this phase, which I fully expect to see continue throughout Secret Wars. It'll be interesting to see how big that potentially could get. Next bit of news is that, well, Armor Wars, which we talked about coming out at D23, there's a little bit more news on this now. And the news, it's interesting in that it is going to be a movie now instead of the show that was originally planned. Most likely that means it's going to slot somewhere into Phase 6. I don't think there's any additional room for movies in Phase 4 or Phase 5. Phase 4 is wrapping up, technically I believe at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy, the holiday special. And speaking of movies, some of the reason why Armor Wars wouldn't be able to fit into Phase 5 is that, or at the very start of Phase 6, is that Deadpool 3 officially has its date. I believe it is September 25th, 2024. So the very start of Phase 6, right after the Thunderbolts, right before the Fantastic Four, and Hugh Jackman, who had said he was done with Wolverine, is coming back to reprise a role for that. This is going to be an R-rated Marvel film from everything that has been said, with, I believe it is Sean Levy, who is directing it. Also the director of Free Guy worked with Ryan Reynolds on that. I'm really excited to see what they can come up with for that one. And finally, and this might be how potentially they open up room to get Armor Wars in earlier, Blade is probably going to be delayed. Now, Blade was announced quite a while ago, 2019, and because of the pandemic, everything like that, it has been pushed back. The director who was attached to it is no longer attached to it, and this is most likely just because of the pushbacks and scheduling conflicts. They were taken off the project. I'm sure they'll still be on there. I believe it's been confirmed they'll still be on there as an executive producer on this project since they had already started to do some work for it. That said, the script apparently was not up to par with what was expected, so it is being completely rewritten. It was originally like a 90-page screenplay, which, if you're familiar with screenplays, having done some screenwriting, taken screenwriting courses, it's approximately 1 minute of film per page. So 90 minutes is a pretty short film, especially by Marvel standards. But I think that's going to be it for the news. And there, like I said, was a lot of news to talk about. The other big thing to talk about is She-Hulk episode 7. And I guess before I touch on that, just a reminder, She-Hulk comes out on Thursdays. There are 2 episodes left. And on Friday, the 7th, there is going to be Werewolf by Night coming out, which has had phenomenal reviews thus far. And we weren't sure it was going to connect to the MCU. It sounds like this might potentially be something that kind of helps set the tone for more of the supernatural stuff within the MCU, which would include Blade. But She-Hulk episode 7 was, well, again, an episode without Daredevil. Jen goes on some of these great dates with Josh, the guy that she met at the wedding, and things are going along really well until one date she invites him back into her place, and when she wakes up, he is gone. And she texts him, doesn't hear anything back. Still doesn't hear anything back after multiple days. And then the parole officer, who's in charge of checking on Emil Blonsky, calls, and something's happened to Emil Blonsky's inhibitor. So Jen is brought out for that, and we actually get a very touching episode of Jen and / She-Hulk kind of coming to the realization that if Josh has ghosted her, it's not worth it. He is not worth it, and that she can still find value within being Jen, even though, I mean, this is an opportunity where that could have happened and now she is left alone. There are some really fun characters. Emil Blonsky, Tim Roth as this more laid-back character is really funny. We get El Guero and Manbull and a guy who claims he's a vampire, as well as then Porcupine Man and one of the Wrecking Crew. Just a real oddball group of characters out there. And I kind of think we'll be going back again, but this episode, again, followed along, I think, pretty well with the wedding episode, in that it was a continuation of that story, but very much its own separate kind of sitcom style of story. And it followed in the form that I'm not necessarily loving for this show, where we get to find out that, like, okay, Josh actually is a bad guy, and he is trying to get her blood. He is trying to find out information on her, and he clones her phone, stuff like that, while she is sleeping after she's brought him back to her place. My issue isn't so much that, well, yet another male character is kind of skeezy. It's very much the point of this show that Jen has a very tough life, especially as Jen, and this whole, how does she incorporate She-Hulk into it? But more so that they forced it into the last couple of minutes. There haven't been end credit scenes, but honestly, it feels like an end credit scene on this one, where we do the flashback to 3 days ago and see what happened from the other perspective, which it works, but it takes the tone of the episode and kind of does away with that. But let me know your thoughts. Do you like where this story is heading? I do think that there's a lot of potentially interesting things that it could end on. And how do you think it's going to end? We only have a couple episodes left. There are potentially a lot of loose ends left to be cleaned up. So leave your thoughts, your comments, tweet them to me at @thescando or with hashtag 10minmarvel, or leave a comment over on nerdologists.com. Again, I want to thank you so much for listening. I give you a few ways you could help at the beginning to support the podcast, but I also have a Patreon, patreon.com/nerdologists. The funds there go to help improve the quality of this podcast, as well as the Malts and Meeples YouTube channel and nerdologists.com website. Well, with that, I'll see you next time.